All right, so I'm trying out this Facebook Live thing, and we're going to see what happens, recommended by a friend of mine. I really want to talk about this concept that I shared in a coaching call today with one of my clients around integrating the old self. And the analogy that I think is most interesting is the analogy of what happens to us when we're teenagers. So when teenagers, especially in the West, or when we become teenagers, we do this thing where we start to reject and push away our parents. We start to create separation. And the reason why we do that is that we want to create enough of a separation. We want to create enough of a divide so we can become ourselves, to become who we want to become. And that's a normal, natural part of the process. But then as we grow older, as we become adults, we then ideally develop a new kind of relationship with our parents. We get in greater connection with them. This is problematic if we have difficult parents or abusive parents, but as we grow older, we can develop this connection with them. And so the challenge that we have as human beings is to be able to pass through this phase of rejection and get back to this place of integration. And this specifically relates to how we deal with old pain. So what happens is a lot of times we have a younger version of ourselves that we live into in order to survive. So, for example, for a large part of my life, I used partying and smoking marijuana and relationship with women, a lot of different things in order to kind of live through a difficult time in my life. I didn't like who I was. I didn't feel great about myself. And so I developed this persona that kept me safe for a long period of time. And that's fine, that's not a problem, right? And then as I moved into the monastery and became more of an adult, I did this thing which is normal. It's what teenagers do. I rejected that part of myself, that unhealthy part of myself, the part of myself that partied a lot and tried to date a bunch of women. I rejected that part of myself. I tried to create separation, and that's fine. The problem is that when we start to reject an old version of ourselves, especially a version of ourselves that we don't like, if we stay in that place too long, we never give ourselves permission to integrate that old version of ourselves. And so we have this really disordered relationship with the younger version of ourselves. We say that part of me is stupid or dumb, or I was so stupid back then. We don't really understand or love who we were and why we needed to be that person to become who we are now. So what we have to do if we want to develop a mature relationship with our old versions of ourselves, to integrate the parts of ourselves we use to survive periods of time in our life, what we have to do is we have to move past the place of rejection, move past the place of saying, screw you old self, screw you dumb self, I don't want to be like you anymore. We need to start to love and appreciate and understand that part of ourselves. And one really simple way to do that is to make time and space for ourselves to give love to that old version of who we were. So whenever we think about, for me it would be, man, when I think about when I smoked pot all the time or dated a bunch of women, instead of going oh, I was so stupid back then, I was such an idiot, I hate that old version of myself, understanding at that time I didn't have the skills I needed to actually deal with my life and cope with my life. And so I used things like drugs and relationships as a way to survive that time period. And that was me just doing the best job I knew how to. That was me I was just trying to survive, trying to be who I was. And so I can really honor and love that person, even though I don't agree with his choices, even though I see that the worldview he lived in was limited and incomplete, and the choices he made weren't always the best choices. I can appreciate and love what he had to do and the choice he made so that I could get to the place I am now and make the choices I'm making now. So if you're a person who's, struggling with trying to change the way you eat or change the way you have a relationship with your parents, instead of being in rejection of your old self, instead of trying to say that old self is crappy and I want to get rid of it, if you can get to the place where you're strong enough to love and appreciate the old way of being, to love and appreciate the way you used to show up in the world, and just to be grateful that there was some part of you that knew enough to survive and get you through that time period so that you could be where you are now and have the point of view you have on your life now, that's really the key. So don't act like a teenager to your old self. Don't act like a teenager to the part of you that had to survive. Instead, develop that mature relationship with your old self. Integrate it and create a space that's big enough, a space within yourself that's big enough to love who you are now as well as every previous version of who you were before. And that's what I wanted to share with you guys today. I hope that you like it. Thanks so much.